Typically on our weekend episodes, I give you some ideas which you can focus on and improve your team over the next week and over the course of the season. But today I'm going to address a very important one that we want to make sure that we're taking care of and improving, and that's you as the coach. So joining me today to talk about some of these topics about coach wellness and some things, very simple things you can do right now during your season to help things like your sleep, to get rid of some of those aches and pains that we get from being out on the field all day, etc., is Gwen Lawrence. And Gwen has 2 Super Bowl rings, which she earned as part of the New York Giants. She was with the New York Giants as their yoga instructor for 16 seasons and really became an integral part of it under Coach Tom Coughlin. In fact, there was a lot of media interest in yoga at the time when Tom Coughlin talked about it. They were kind of the first team to implement it. Now just about everybody in the NFL, most FBS programs, have started to use yoga with their athletes. I know my son's team, when he was a senior last year here at Avon Lake High School, they used it on Saturdays and his team loved it. So she's learned a lot about just little things you can do to help improve your wellness. So joining me is Gwen Lawrence. Gwen, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Coach. Happy to be here.
So Gwen, I really want to learn about how you got involved with the New York Giants. If we were talking about this today and being, a well-known yoga instructor, it probably wouldn't be as big of a question. But back when you first got involved, yoga was not part of the routine for anybody in the NFL. So how did that come about?
True. And thanks for appreciating that, because I definitely think I forged a path for many of my own trainees and other people to do the same thing I did. I actually started, my husband's a coach. He played minor league baseball for a while and then became a coach. And I started working with his teams and noticing some of the things that were, not exactly right with the training, and how each sport, and not only sport, but position, has different needs, different common injuries, different movements on the field. So I started to really think about, how I could formulate real sport-specific routines for him. And he started me with his football team, high school football team, and I just saw how great it was. We saw a significant drop in injuries. We saw a better morale, better mental fitness, and I was lucky enough to be working with Frank Gifford, and Frank Gifford believes in me and his whole family. I was part of the family for a very, very, very long time, and he was gracious enough to give me an intro to the Giants and just get my foot in the door. All I really wanted was an intro, and I just wanted to be hired on my own, accord and talent. And 16 years later, I guess they saw the value in it. And every year, like you mentioned, Coach Coughlin, he's just been a great mentor to me and the biggest supporter to me, and really had an open mind to new ways of training. And we would meet every year and try to change things up and improve things. And we just evolved together and really created something special, and enabled me to start a school and train people in 28 countries to do what I do now for all types of athletes.
So as you started your work with the team, again, for a lot of teams now, it's just a part of it. But back then, and probably I think if we're looking at maybe doing this with a high school team and those kids who aren't, familiar with it at all, we might have that same reaction. But back then, what was the reaction of the players as you started working with them?
It was actually amazing. I love to see the evolution of their understanding of the yoga, and most particularly, it was Sean O'Hara, and he recruited the O-line, which is infamously tight, that O-line, and champions. And he gave it a try, and his fellow linemen came, and I remember Channel 7 came and did a interview, and they asked, about his yoga and these big guys doing yoga. And he said, yeah, I was a little resistant. I thought it was going to be all oming and things like that. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's pretty much one of the hardest things I've ever done. So I really have to hand it to him because, he was one of the leaders on the team. And once he and Amani Toomer accepted it, it sort of trickled down from there, and the trust was built in. But each year, as you know, with football, there's a big turnover, and it's almost like a reselling every year and proving to them what it can do for them. And they literally feel the benefits in one session, and then they're pretty much hooked. But it takes a little coaxing initially, for sure.
Well, I do want to come back to this topic of yoga with the players at the end of our conversation, because I do think, I want coaches to hear really what that can do for their teams as well. But I do want to get focused on the coach, which was our main purpose of talking today. Too often we focus on our players' health and well-being, making sure those guys are ready to go on game day, but we're not necessarily always great examples of that. So I'll use myself as an example here. When I coached high school football, I don't exactly know why, but I would come out of every season and I would get sick. And usually it started with upper respiratory or sinuses or something like that. And it got to the point where after every season would kind of get worse and worse. And sometimes that thing would hang over all the way through Christmas. I remember one time at Christmas I had pneumonia, which was just killing my lungs. Yeah. So those things that we don't take care of can accumulate. I think for me, it seemed like I would really hold on and my immune system would be strong. But when there was that, the season was over and it was like that take a breath, then everything hit me at once. And then when I went to the college level, there I did not experience that at the end of the season. I think some of it was I was always on turf. We were kind of in newer buildings, and I think there were some environmental factors involved there. But I would usually come out of that season, and my physical was usually at the end of the year, and my numbers were awful as far as like cholesterol and blood pressure, to the point where the one season that he got me in to see a cardiologist as quick as he could. And, I'm in my early 40s at the time. You typically don't see a cardiologist then. But we don't do a good job as coaches. We get, our mind gets encumbered with all the ideas, the things we need to do. It's not necessarily like other professions where things can be set aside till tomorrow. You're trying to solve all those problems. You're always thinking about the what ifs, which obviously leads to your mind constantly going, right? I know I never ever got good sleep during the season. So I'm sure you hear that a lot. I'm sure, not just in the football profession, but people who are focused on trying to be the best at what they do, that sometimes they forget to take care of themselves.
Correct. You said something that was perfect. You said too often us coaches are worried about the players, and all due respect, I'm going to have to correct you and say always.
Yeah.
I've never seen one coach that put themselves in front of the players, and it may be a played out sort of analogy, but on the plane and put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others. And even just being a mom, I know that if I'm not right, I'm not the best mom, and I am putting myself at risk to get sick. And all the things that you mentioned aren't coincidentally all stress-related illnesses, right? When we lower our immunity and just one thing is off, it could just throw the whole body off. And sleep, one of the most major of all. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the giant coaches just camp out in their offices, and that can't be fun. That can't be comfortable. That can't be stress-free for sure. You never really have a chance for downtime.
Right. Yeah. I mean, true. Yes, I've done that.
Yeah.
for coaches, we like to look at, okay, what's the game plan for this? And so I think it starts with, here's some basic things you can do. And like with everything, there's adjustments you can make along the way. So when I think of the adjustment side, I mean, there's things that pop up, like beginning of camp season, I would always have like my hamstrings and lower back tight because we're up and around for the first time for hours. We probably haven't done that for a while. So we start to get some of those aches and pains over the course of the season too that need adjusted. But, thinking of just looking at some of the basic things coaches can do and get started with here, what are some recommendations you have?
Well, I'm definitely going to, stress that it's the best for the coach to be the example for the team. So if they can start with these techniques and really personally prove them, they're going to be more passionate about trickling down to their team. But to answer your question, I think the best thing that they can do is learn how to breathe. My yoga in particular is based on a system of 6 facets. And, when you talk about yoga, most often people's mind, imagination, and picture goes to flexibility and putting their leg behind their head and doing splits. And it's not all about that. And I like to, in baseball, what do they say? Is it the 5-tool athlete? Am I going to say that wrong? Mm-hmm. But you want to have the 6 tools, and you want to have balance in your body and symmetry, because the most symmetrical your body is, the less amount of injury. You want to have obviously functional strength and take care of your muscle tone. And you do want to have flexibility, but you want to have equal flexibility to strength. But most importantly, I think for the coaches, it comes down to mental toughness and developing that mental fitness and focus, because, mind chatter and distractions can really become detrimental to your ability to coach the best that you can. And finally, and probably most importantly, what I said was breath work. Mm-hmm. So I really try to keep that in conjunction with some of these regeneration yoga moves, so that they're doing 2 things at once, because nobody knows better than you how precious time is with coaches and players. So I want to be the most efficient I can with the best things that they can do to check off their boxes. Right? Right.
What I like about some of the things you're going to suggest is none of this takes a lot of time, right? We're talking about minutes here and there. We have those minutes here and there. So it's using them maybe in a different way mm-hmm. to allow us to be, more mindful, to calm our mind. And I guess, when we look at those kinds of things, there are certain ways that people have a perception of what it is. So, for example, mindfulness and meditating means you're going to sit down and close your eyes and have distraction-free area, right, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't have to be like that, especially for the busy coach.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the biggest deterrent. I can't be quiet. I don't have time to sit still. I don't have time to close my eyes. And the truth of the matter is, it took me 20 years to master meditation, and I think it gets a bad rap because of the stillness and the quiet that you need. And we are not monks in the mountains of Tibet, and we don't have the option to really tune out for long amounts of time. And studies have been shown that even 3 to 5 minutes a day can really, start to shift the brain and calm you down. And once that happens, you're going to be better thinking. You're going to be better thinking on the fly, which is what you need in the middle of the game. Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
That's right. That's right.
If you're mentally unstable, you're going to make the wrong call. And guess what? The whole country is going to attack you for it. So there's very simple things you can do right now for 1 to 3 minutes with your eyes open while you're driving, while you're coaching, or, yes, if you do happen to have the luxury of just being still, you can do that as well.
I know for me, that my perception of meditation was exactly that. And I did take it up a couple years ago, just for that idea of learning to calm my mind a little bit and be more mindful. I could tell you during the season, even when I was, I'd get home, when I was there, I wasn't there. Right. I mean, my mind was always somewhere else. And it's important for us to be where we are, right? Be where our feet are, take care of those things that we need to take care of at those times. So we are going to share a resource that you put together at the end that goes into more detail. But I guess if you could give us an overview of what that looks like for somebody to be able to take those 1 to 3 minutes and how they would start to do some things and practice some things that are going to help them, as you said, huge benefits to it, even on game day, going to help them be more mindful.
Right. You want to have the most calm mind as possible. And one of the best, I think, even visually, the best example of this is, I know we're talking football, but if you could think about a pitcher for a second, a Major League Baseball pitcher, I think we've all seen one that kind of lost it mentally on the mound, right? And that's it. The game is shot. They have no chance anymore. The batter got in their head. The chirping team got in their head, and it's over. And it's the same thing for coaches, for every player, no matter what sport you're in. If your head is not there, you're done. You're doomed. And someone's going to pick up on that vibe. So really, I think as simple as learning diaphragmatic breathing, and that sounds fancy and that sounds hard, but diaphragmatic breathing is simply breathing in and out through your nose and deep down into your belly. So it's this big, deep diaphragmatic breath. You're using the diaphragm to fill and empty your lungs. And what that does, and this isn't a yoga woo-woo thing, this is medical science. And what that does is it actually shuts down the fight or flight response and calms you down immediately. So then you can access the things in your brain that you need to access on the fly, and you're not just worried about survival or breath. You're more functioning. You have the biggest playbooks that I've ever seen in my life. So that freaks me out. So if I can make them more mentally sound to access all those plays, that's even better. And it's as simple as 1 to 3 minutes. You can do this between plays, on the sideline, on the field, simply in and out through the nose, deep down into the belly. And I do want to mention, though, that there is a time and place for that fight or flight, especially for players in the middle of a play. You don't want them to be perfectly calm, right? You want them to have a little bit of fire, a little bit of urgency going on, a little bit more blood flow to the limbs, right? But this is the main point about doing this important work is, in the past I always go back to, just easier for me to envision, I go back to sort of the caveman days, right? You have these threats, and what's the threat? I don't know, maybe it's a dinosaur invading your camp, and that's when you need the fight or flight, right? You run, you flee, you get to safety, and then you can calm down. Today, our world today is constantly plugged in. It's 24/7, and we're living in these constant levels of stress. And our body is not equipped to handle that. And guess what? That's what lowers your immunity. That's what makes you sick at the end of the season. And it's all accumulating. You're just not even taking the time to feel it, right? So the other side effect of doing these mindful practices is being able to just tune in to your body in the now, like you just said, and actually feel, I'm not breathing very well, or, my back hurts, and too often they say, I just picked up a piece of paper, my back was fine, and I threw it out. Well, that really wasn't the case. It was the straw that broke the camel's back at that point.
Right.
So, yes, managing your stress levels, but also giving you this opportunity to really tune into your body and your needs before it's an injury or an illness.
What prompted me to start studying this is, I got an Apple Watch, and, the first time I had it on, it tells me to breathe. And I'm like, I am breathing. What are you talking about here? Right. And then, so I did read a little bit on the app and what it was for. And now anytime it does it, I take that minute and I go ahead and I breathe like that. And that's exactly what you're talking about in between plays, in between series. And, what I thought about here, I know I had a coach on from Illinois, Rob Pomazak, who's the head coach at St. Charles North. And he did talk about, and I think this was like during the shutdown when I had him on, he talked about how he was starting to get his players more using some of these practices like that, like breathing, like learning to calm themselves between plays in a series, right? Because, we don't want them necessarily on this emotional roller coaster ride all the time, especially like if they had that bad play, right? Okay, now you can go to some of these breathing techniques. As a coach, right? Sometimes you start to feel like those bad plays piled up and that it's your fault, you didn't make the right call. It's a good time to step aside, take some of those breaths, get refocused, and get yourself back to that place where you need to be.
Correct. Turn the page and move on, not dwell in it where it affects you on the next play, and then it snowballs into a lost game with no hope, right? We've all seen that poor kicker that missed, right? Mm-hmm. And then his career is over. He just got it in his head mentally that he couldn't kick anymore, and they're done. We don't want that to happen to coaches, players, anybody involved.
You mentioned a little bit about the back pain or whatever it might be. And so part of this is really doing some things so that we don't get to that point where we've worn ourselves out or put our body in a position where it's going to start feeling pain. And I know a big suggestion that you have is to start working just, again, short routines. Could be in the morning. I know you like the morning routine. It could be at night. Without getting into all the details of it, what does that routine look like, and really how long does it take?
One of my main philosophies is being proactive to health rather than reactive to injury. So if you know you have a history of back or hamstrings or neck or even, belly aches, that's where it lands for you. You want to choose these bite-sized, doable, daily, if possible, if not 2 to 3 times a week, videos that are like 10 minutes that really just become a part of your routine, and even rotating them. So maybe you never really experienced back pain, but it really doesn't hurt to be proactive to stretching and little strength moves to prevent it from happening even in the beginning. We all know what our one weakness is, but the truth of the matter is every year they just sort of pile up on top of each other, and before you know it, you have shoulder stuff, and you never really had that before. So you want to just do routines that you can rotate on a schedule. And I'm not suggesting stopping your running, stopping your lifting. I still lift. I still go on the treadmill every day. But the reason I can at my age is because I also do my yoga and target my entire body, throughout the entire week.
That stuff does accumulate, and as football coaches at one time or another, all of us have played the game, and some of us played the game when maybe there wasn't as much knowledge about the techniques that might keep us safer, and that they're using today with their own players. Some of these injuries as you get older are going to creep up on you. So for me, that happened a few weeks ago. I was just in the middle of the day, started having this pain along, it was really like started in my shoulder, but kind of was down into my chest, into my back. It felt like, I had this really bad muscle strain. And then I wondered, like, wait a minute, am I having a heart attack? And then kind of, I took my blood pressure, did those things. I wasn't having a heart attack, but could not figure out. It would not stretch out. Nothing I did moving around was helping it. Well, I ended up going to a chiropractor. He's actually a former player of mine that I coached when I was at the high school level, and he's now, he played football forever. Actually had some injuries that got him into the type of practice that he has. So I went in with him, got these X-rays, and he has this computer program that he started mapping points along that X-ray in my spine and neck, and then he shows me a picture of where my spine was aligned and where it should be, and it was way off from that line. He said this is, this did not happen last week. This is the buildup of probably playing football and other things that, and I told him some of my history, had a car accident, etc., that it eventually is going to show up, right? And so fortunately, we've caught it at the right time where it's not going to be, we're going to get it corrected here over the course of maybe 3 months and get it back to where it's supposed to be. But a lot of times you keep letting that go. Even told me, people start to get those stress fractures and they get to the point where it's not going to be fixed. So fortunately, no surgery, nothing big like that. Some easy exercises, some, seeing the chiro and a physical therapist, we're going to get it straightened out. But if I could have had maybe some routines along the way that were regenerative and helped fix that, that would be important. And I know in the program that you've put together for coaches, that's part of it as well.
Yeah, a lot of regeneration. I separate it into upper body and lower body, so it is a little bit more bite-sized. And then mostly, the problem areas, shoulders, neck, back, legs, and even ankles in there. So that's great. You're going to do them on alternate days. And, by the end of 2 weeks, you got everything in there and probably brought your attention and awareness to an area that needs a little bit more attention. And most of the time, the videos or the areas you work on that you hate are the ones that you need to do. The ones that you're really successful and great at and love, you could probably skip that one next time in the round and just really zone in and hold. And there's also something to be said about really starting their day right and ending their day right, and starting just energizing properly, not just jumping out of bed, just grabbing coffee and running, and then all of a sudden, you're bogged down and haven't eaten till 1 or 2. I'm sure that sounds familiar, but just, being a little more kind to yourself in the morning, even if it's for 10 minutes. And a lot of us just press the snooze for 10 minutes. So get up, do this, and then start your day and see the difference that it makes. And the same thing at night. You can't just step off that field after hours of practice and film watching and worry and planning and strategy and go to sleep. It's not going to happen. So another thing to do is a little 10-minute, rest.
Exactly. And that's what I love about the things you put together. Again, not a whole lot of time, 10 minutes or less, and then pinpointing some of those areas, right? This is, having some back pain, or my shoulder hurts today, or whatever it might be that you specifically have laid out some of those things, and then obviously provided some instruction on video that goes along with it. So definitely some ways, if you're having these issues, I highly recommend this. I'll share a link in the show notes, and I know that she's discounted it right now for coaches who are listening. So I highly recommend this link in the show notes. One other thing in this regard to coaches, and I mentioned it earlier, like the trouble sleeping, right? Shutting off your brain. How can this help you get better sleep, obviously, which, again, is going to have huge benefits to you as in your health, but probably in the way that you're going to be able to focus at practice in the classroom on game day?
Correct. And I definitely just like to mention from my mentor, Tom Coughlin. I asked him one time, we would chat a lot, and I asked him one time, what is it like the night before the Super Bowl? And he said, I actually sleep like a baby. And I was pretty surprised to hear that. And I asked him, well, why? How can that possibly be? And he said, I prepared as much as can possibly done mentally, physically, and emotionally. I know there was no stone unturned, no page left unopened, and I know I did everything so I can sleep. And I think everybody should kind of take that to heart, even on the day-to-day basis. You do your checklist and be okay with that, and then give yourself some time for some healing and leveling out of some of those hormones and emotions and energy levels.
Flipping gears here, back to the player. And I had mentioned my son last year on Saturday mornings, they would do yoga. Now, last year it was really important to him. He'd play that Friday night game. He was a receiver, and he was on special teams. So, he'd wake up in the morning with, some little aches and pains here and there. Now, for him last year, though, having been a shutdown all through COVID, where coaches couldn't really see him, so he ended up playing fall baseball to be able to get in front of some coaches too. So, he couldn't exactly go and perform at his best level if he wasn't physically ready to go. And he found that the yoga routine that they were doing in the morning after a game, and certainly he liked doing that more than the lifting, was much more productive and got him back physically to a good place where he was able to go then later in the day and play baseball and compete there too. So what I really like of one of the things you've put together is, for every position coach out there, Gwen has put together things specifically for that position group. So you've looked at some of the details that go into all of this. So I guess the first question is, how can it be specific to those things, and what do you focus on? And we could take a position as an example that makes it unique for each position and probably more beneficial than going through something very general.
There is an argument to be made that, back and hips are great for every player. But what I was observing when I was watching them do some, pregame stuff in training was that a lot of times they were doing the same thing. And it struck me because let's just take a wide receiver as opposed to, an O lineman, right? Not only very different bodies, very different jobs on the field. So why would they have to do the same preparation? It just didn't make sense in my brain. So I wanted to separate positions, not only sports, but positions. So let's take the O lineman. You want a lot of strength and stability. You want explosive power and a lot of, shoulder push power and even to get deep down into the hips. Some of my best squatters are these big O linemen, which I think is shocking to a lot of people. And then compare that to a wide receiver, usually a taller, leaner guy, more fast twitch speed. They need to be able to have tremendous rotation in the spine in order to sometimes being up in the air and turn and make a catch. Whereas for the most part, that O-lineman is straight on. Yes, I know there's other, side to side things, but if we're going to talk in generalities, you could see very different needs. Very big open ankle, so they have more power to push, more speed, more finesse in their running, the wide receivers, as well as maybe more arm extension and shoulder flexibility in all directions. Whereas my O-lineman, I work more on shoulder stability and that concentrated strength. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I agree. There are those different movements that are more important to one player than another. So I know these routines that you've put together are around 20 minutes or so. As I said, I think they're great for that day after the game, to be able to get your players to do something physically, to get them moving. Maybe a lot better than some of the old traditional things we might have done, but gets them back on track and ready for that next week of competition. I guess the question I have next is, can you do some things? Can you break this up and do a few things throughout the week with them too that are going to help them without getting into a 20-minute routine?
Yeah, absolutely. You can just find, like I said before, those trouble spots or the things that you hate the most, and you'll become acutely aware of them when you start doing the videos, and just take them out in pieces and just do that as a standalone, like a pigeon pose for hips and back. And just like you said, when I was working with the Giants, we did full team mandatory regen yoga on Mondays, unless they played Monday Night Football, of course. And then we also did stations on Fridays, and yoga being one of the most popular stations on Friday. So I obviously can't kick their butt on Friday. That wouldn't make sense. In 2 days, they'd be the most sore. But what I did was overall, loosening up, tuning in, breath work, and it was really, really well received.
Yeah, I do think in looking at one of the trends in practice routines through the season or practice schedules is to do, depends on whether you're college or high school, but a no sweat Wednesday or a no sweat Thursday, where it's more on the mental part and walkthroughs and letting the body heal a little bit from those 2 heavy days of pounding with full pads, full go, etc. And then on Friday do a crisp, short, full speed, low contact, but full speed workout where they're running through things. And I see this as something that implementing a routine on those no sweat days, I think would be very beneficial as well.
Definitely. And I kind of sneak in a little bit, and this might maybe scare a few people, but some of the poses are longer holds, 1 to 3 minutes in these. And you're not standing, but deep hold stretches that are kind of supported. And, one of the ways I work that with players is to not give them an out. So while they're holding this deep stretch, while they're really opening and working on some regen, encouraging them to develop the mental toughness and focus with their breath. They're not allowed to come out of the pose, just like they're not allowed to leave the field. You can't leave the field when you have the ball, you're down by 3 and, there's 30 seconds left. You can't quit. You have to find a way, and we start to implement those ideas while they're doing their yoga. So it just makes them even more excited about doing it and developing as a player.
Well, Gwen, I think these are some great things for coaches. And I know that I was always hesitant to add a lot of new things during the season, but I do feel, especially as teams get into the late season, we've had that wear and tear on their bodies for, 5 weeks now, 4 or 5 weeks now, that adding this isn't going to be something that is a huge task to take on, that you do take them through the video step by step. It would be as simple as getting the video up in front of your team in a place where they have room to do all these poses, and it takes I guess a lot of the burden off of the coach if they want to implement this right now.
Yeah, for sure. And optimum, you start at preseason, not always optimum. If you're seeing that you're starting to accumulate some injuries, it really is in your best interest to maybe, dare I say, cut down running on one day and put this in and just sort of create a more, like I said, focusing on those 6 facets, more well-rounded athlete. And you can always get some of that conditioning stuff in. That's a little easier for them to do on their own, but if they can commiserate and start yoga together until they really find the love for it and really see how it's helping them on day one, it's not a hard sell, but you just got to start. That's all. Start where you are.
I was really excited to come across both of these products in the Coach Tube library, and I know you've offered a discount for our listeners on each of these individually, but if you want to save and get both of these, we do have a bundle available for you where you could save even more by purchasing both of these. Again, the link for those will be in the show notes. And Gwen, I know you have a lot more to offer in terms of what we can do with our players from the perspective that you bring to this, and I would love to have you back sometime in the future to talk about more things we could do with our players and as ourselves as coaches.
Yes, for sure. This is absolutely my purpose in life, helping coaches and players just be better, is be consistent, to be great. So nothing would make me happier than to be on here and help you spread that word more and more.